Numbers chapter 30, verses 1 to 16. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the people of Israel, saying, "This is what the Lord has commanded. If a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. If a woman vows a vow to the Lord and binds herself by a pledge, while within her father's house in her youth, and her father hears of her vow and of her pledge by which she has bound herself and says nothing to her, then all her vows shall stand, and every pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father opposes her on the day that he hears of it, no vow of hers, no pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. And the Lord will forgive her because her father opposed her. If she marries a husband while under her vows, or any thoughtless utterance of her lips by which she has bound herself, and her husband hears of it and says nothing to her on the day that he hears, then her vows shall stand, and her pledges by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if on the day that her husband comes to hear of it, he opposes her, then he makes void her vow that was on her, and the thoughtless utterance of her lips by which she bound herself. The Lord will forgive her. But any vow of a widow or a divorced woman, anything by which she has bound herself, shall stand against her. And if she vowed in her husband's house or bound herself by a pledge with an oath, and her husband heard of it and said nothing to her, and did not oppose her, then all her vows shall stand, and every pledge by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband makes them null and void on the day that he hears them, then whatever proceeds out of her lips concerning her vows or concerning her pledge of herself shall not stand. Her husband has made them void, and the Lord will forgive her. Any vow and any binding oath to afflict herself, her husband may establish, or her husband may make void. But if her husband says nothing to her from day to day, then he establishes all her vows and all her pledges that are upon her. He has established them because he said nothing to her on the day that he heard of them. But if he makes them null and void after he has heard of them, then he shall bear her iniquity. These are the statutes that the Lord commanded Moses about a man and his wife, and about a father and his daughter, while she is in her youth within her father's house. The Bible puts a lot of emphasis on respecting the authority of God within relationships. In this chapter, we see vows made by men and women. For men, it is straightforward. If a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Let his yes be yes and no be no. We should be very careful about making vow which we cannot fulfill. An example of how seriously God views it is seen in the history of Israel. During the time of Joshua, a group of people called Gibeonites tricked Joshua into believing that they were coming from far away country. They asked for an assurance that they will not be destroyed along with other nations. Without inquiring of the Lord, Joshua made a treaty with them. After making this covenant, they found out that they had been tricked, but still honored the covenant made in the name of the Lord. Many years later, as we read in 2 Samuel chapter 21, King Saul pursued the Gibeonites and sought to kill them off in the zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. 2 Samuel 21 verse 5. His anger at the Gibeonites was not personal hatred, but was induced by zeal for the welfare of the Israelites. But God took it very seriously, because it was a breach of covenant. Much later, after the death of Absalom and King David's restoration to his throne, Israel was visited by a grievous famine, which was a result of King Saul's treatment of the Gibeonites. God thus emphasized to the Israelites that they needed to be credible people. that they should always honor their words. The vow made by Joshua was made on behalf of Israel and must be honored. On that occasion, unfaithfulness was what Israel had to pay for. Change of leadership must not translate to change of vow or agreement. In this chapter, in the case of woman, there is an additional clause. If she is unmarried, then the vow made by her should also be ratified by her father. If her father remains silent after hearing of the vows, she is bound to keep it. If he opposes her, she is freed from her pledge. That means she is free from her vow before God, and God will forgive her. This brings into focus the responsibility of fathers concerning daughters entering into a vow before God. The same is true about husbands. If a husband opposes the pledge she makes on the day he first hears about it, he may forbid her. It is important that in either case, the woman no longer bears the blame for breaking her vows, but it is transferred to either the father or the husband. It is not a case of women's vows being lightly regarded. In contrast, they are so seriously regarded that their breach, if owing to the intervention of father or husband, is put into their account, that they have to pay for their broken vows, which is, as we earlier noticed, a grave offense. A remarkable example is that of Hannah, the mother of Samuel, who vowed that if God would grant her a son, she would dedicate him to the Lord for his whole life. She made this known to her husband after Samuel's birth, when the household was about to go up to Jerusalem for the next year's festival. And Elkanah recognizes the validity of a vow, so that Samuel is indeed left in God's sanctuary to grow up while yet a boy. In this passage, God here upholds the principle of subordination, without which there is no effective way to maintain order in any society, whether at family or community level. At the same time, he underlines the principle of respect for the subordinate by those in authority, by highlighting the intrinsic worth of each person's decision. That is, whether leader or subordinate, he makes it clear that a broken vow at any level will be held against the person responsible. If one in authority causes their subordinate to forsake their pledge, whatever it may be, the leader will have to pay the cost before God for this interference. It is not a light thing to step between a person and God. In Deuteronomy 22, we read about the case of a husband accusing sexual immorality in his wife before she was married. Now her parents are brought into the picture, and if the accusation is proven false, the man is punished and made to pay the fine prescribed. But if it is true, the woman is to be stoned by the people. In every other offense, the offender is taken outside the camp and stoned. But in this case, she is brought to the door of her father's house and stoned. The father is held responsible for harboring and encouraging his daughter in her immoral behavior before marriage. Fathers and husbands have a great responsibility to protect their children and wives. But if they prevent them from their vows to God, they are held blameworthy. At the same time, those under authority are responsible to fulfill their vows unless they are disallowed by those over them. In such a case, they are not to be fearful, for God holds them blameless. In an age where hierarchy of command was all important, God underlines his equal valuation of all, whether high or low, on the social structure. God is no respecter of persons. Before him, all are alike, responsible to keep their word and to fulfill their vows made before him. No authority is greater than that of God in any woman's life. The purpose of this chain of command is to encourage and promote obedience towards God and not to take God's place. Anyone who prevents wife or daughter from doing what she has promised to do before God takes over her sin of broken vows and will have to face the consequences. Let us be fearful before God and respect the authorities, what God has kept in our life. God bless.